Welcome to the Bret Boone podcast. I am Bret Boone. Today I'm joined by a three-time Super Bowl champ, four times. He was a Pro Bowler. He's a 49er legend. Ladies and gentlemen, Brent Jones. Brent, thanks for coming on the Bret Boone podcast.
Man, it's an honor, Brett. Grew up loving baseball and certainly followed your career, so it's great to be on and talk a little sports.
I'll tell you what, for those of you listening to the podcast right now, this is fun for me. I have certain timestamps in my life. Now, when I'm a kid, Dad was playing for the Phillies, so everything was Phillies to me. Everything was 76ers, Eagles, when they used to have the Eagles-Dallas matchup and, on Monday night, and Mom wouldn't let me stay up to watch it. But then fast forward to my, when I'm 16, 17 years old, it was Niners football for me. It was who are the Niners playing? West Coast offense. Who are they going to blow out this week? So late 80s, early 90s. That's really the last time I paid attention to football consistently. And those were your teams. Oh, I loved it. I loved Montana and Young and you and it was just, that's my wheelhouse. So I just want to tell you, I'm kind of a fanboy, Brent.
I'll take it. It's nice to hear.
Yeah. All right, Super Bowl week. And you mentioned you're kind of a baseball guy at heart. You were a catcher in college at Santa Clara. Give me your upbringing. I know your dad was drafted by the Raiders, so you had a football lineage in your family. But tell me about your love for baseball and how you're kind of, you wanted to be a baseball player and things turned out different for you. Tell me that a little bit about that journey and where that all stemmed from.
I did. I grew up swinging the wiffle ball bat as a 2-year-old and loved the game from that point. So played Little League, played all through high school, was being recruited a little bit, thought I had a chance to go play at USC, which was my dream. And strangely enough, at the 11th hour, Santa Clara came through with a baseball and a football scholarship for me. And I kind of shrugged my shoulders and said, wow, I never thought of playing football. Ironically, I was the third wide receiver on our high school team. So didn't start, but played in a handful of games. And I figured that was the end of my football career. But our high school coach had told them that I really had some potential. So I ended up going to Santa Clara, redshirted my first year in football, and had a really strong baseball season, came back for my second year, my sophomore year in college, and started in football at wide receiver for the first time. Actually enjoyed it. Dislocated my shoulder last game of the season. Had to have surgery and was going to miss baseball season. And I found out that my baseball scholarship was gone when I went to register for winter classes. And they said, you don't have a scholarship anymore. And that was a brutal way to find out. And really, really bothered me. I was going to transfer schools, go the JUCO route like many baseball players did. And our football coach at Santa Clara, Pat Malley at the time, called me in and he said, hey, before you leave, I want you to know that we'll pick up your baseball scholarship. You can be a full-time football guy now. We think if we move your position to tight end, there's a chance you could play in the NFL someday. And I kind of laughed. But I kind of bid on it too. And so all of a sudden I was a tight end. I was a 195-pound tight end and put on some weight and got in the weight room and got serious about football. And that changed the whole trajectory of my life.
It's amazing because, growing up, writing was kind of on the wall for me. I played all sports, loved them all. Basketball was my favorite. But I kind of knew, I don't think I'm going to the NBA. Baseball, I was always advanced at that. And as time went on, I knew where I was going. So I always had, from probably my sophomore year in high school on, I'm a baseball player. I'm going to go in. I'm going to tell you, if you don't know what I'm going to do when I grow up, just sit down and I'll tell you for about a half hour. I was naive to say the least. But I always had that. I knew I was going to the big leagues. I knew I was going to play in the big leagues for 15 years. I didn't know who I was going to play for, but I knew it was already, in my mind, it was already done. And as we progress throughout our careers and we look back, I'm sure you do this like I do. When we're young and we're coming up, we're house on fire and we just want to do well and prove that we belong. Then you establish yourself and you reflect back and you look at that young player and say, man, did I have a lot to learn. Then 10 years later, I'm a veteran player and I think I know it all. And now all of a sudden, 10 years after that, now I'm retired. I'm looking at that 10-year vet going, he didn't know anything. I want to know, was baseball something in your mind that you wanted to do professionally? Was your dream to be a big league baseball player and football just kind of fell in the way?
100%, Brett. I'm telling you, I don't know looking back why I didn't transfer schools, because to take your dream away, and I thought I was a pretty good baseball player, and I had never, and it's funny because what you say as a young man, my confidence was, hey, I was going to go ahead and I was going to play in the major leagues. I didn't think about how tough it was to fight my way up from the minors and battle and deal with injuries and different dynamics. I just thought, no, that's what I'm going to do. And, here I am in college and it was kind of ripped away from me. And I was super frustrated. And I thought, I'm just going to go try the junior college route and go that way and maybe go to a 4-year, but maybe, hopefully get drafted. But our football coach somehow talked me into staying at school.
He saw something.
He did. The weirdest thing is I didn't see it. I just thought, maybe it's best. I liked my friends. I was getting a good education, and maybe it was the first time that I realized, maybe I should try to be a little bit more mature in my thinking and what do I want to do when I grow up? But I had never thought anything other than playing in the major leagues. So I took all that frustration and anger about the baseball situation and put it into, I'm going to be the best football player I can be. And, I was a pretty good wide receiver, but moving to tight end was a whole different thing because, you were playing with guys that didn't have the same coverage ability. And it took me a while to put on some weight, but I was pretty fast for a tight end at the time. And man, it was a lot of fun. And, you're a small Division II kid. You don't expect to play in the NFL. But as things went on, I thought, you know what? That's what I'm going to do. I'm going to play in the NFL. And I didn't look back, and miraculously, I had the opportunity.
I mean, that is awesome because I don't know, like you said, you were a lot like me. Like, I'm going to the big leagues. I'm going to, and if they would have taken that away from me, and I really didn't think sport 2 was going to work out, basketball for me, which at 5'10", I don't think I was going anywhere. But I don't know how I wouldn't. It's amazing to me that you didn't make that transfer because baseball was really on your mind. You didn't have NFL. You didn't think you were an NFL player.
Didn't have
it'd be one thing if you thought, well, I still think I'm good enough to be an NFL player, so I'll just go that route. But you weren't even thinking about that. You're like, all right, now what am I going to do? What am I going to do to support my family?
Yes.
And this all happens. It's a pretty cool story.
It's really cool. And I was, I owe my college coach so much for believing in me. But it was a stretch at that time to say, yeah, maybe you could play in the NFL. I'd played 1 year of Division II football. And so looking back, somehow I started to believe it and work toward it and made an opportunity for myself along the way.
Okay, for a guy with 3 Super Bowl rings, it didn't start out the smoothest for you. You get drafted in the 5th round by the Steelers, and then you have a big-time car accident that kind of derailed that part. Talk to me about that time in your life. And you go from baseball getting taken away to, all right, now I get drafted in the NFL. Oh, wow, this is going to work out. And then this happens before we get to those Niner years. Take me through that section of your life. What's going on now in your mind?
Yeah, it was really rough, Brett. So the excitement, you can imagine sitting around waiting for the phone ring on draft day. Back then, the draft was on ESPN, this upstart cable company that nobody had heard about. And they had the first 3 rounds on TV. And then after that, it would go to Fishing with Orlando Wilson. And so the draft started at 5 a.m. West Coast time. So I was up waiting for the phone to ring, thinking maybe I could sneak into the 3rd round. the draft went off the air, and it was about another hour or so before the phone rang, and it was Art Rooney, the owner of the Pittsburgh Steelers, calling me and saying, "Hey, welcome to the Steelers." And I was blown away. I never really had the Steelers on my radar. I was more of a pass catching tight end, and they didn't throw the ball a whole lot, but they wanted to change what they were doing. And so I went back there, press conference, the whole deal, and thinking, wow, I might be able to get a Super Bowl trophy one of these days. The Steelers had won 4 in the 70s, and it was super exciting. 2 weeks later, driving home on Mother's Day with my fiance, who's now my wife, and a drunk driver came down the wrong side of the road, hit us head on. It was pretty violent collision. We were both wearing seatbelts. She broke her jaw, dislocated her shoulder. I had no visible signs of a problem, but ambulance came, and by the time we got to the hospital, I couldn't move my neck very well. Ended up having a pretty serious disc herniation. And so, tough way to start your NFL career. I thought, you got to be kidding me. And so went back to Pittsburgh, was on the injured reserve list for a while, making a whopping $70,000. And the doctors at the time felt like I didn't need surgery, that after 6 months with some rehab and some things that it could go back into place. And after about 2 months, their doctors came in and said, we don't see the progress. We don't want you, being a hanger on. So we're just going to release you. And I remember thinking, what? Can they even do that? And so I was kind of devastated, had already lost the baseball dream, had a miraculous football dream come and almost evaporate overnight, and went back home and sulked for a few weeks, and then kind of started working out and thinking, I'm going to give it another shot. And had a few teams call, and I just said, I'm going to sign with the 49ers as a free agent. This is when you go to training camp and there were 130 guys. And so it was just a meat market, trying to battle through, even get anybody to acknowledge your name. It was tough. There was a bunch of established guys, and this was back in the days where roster size were limited. We only had 45 guys. There was no practice squad. There was nothing like that. And so I had to fight and scratch my way through training camp and catch every ball and, know every assignment, even get on the radar.
It's amazing because people, fans, and not to say there's so much more to it than being a great football player, being a great baseball player. The politics get involved. Like you said, you're coming from the Steelers. They don't have a big investment in you. So you got to kind of, it's like the kids that come into the minor leagues, that first round pick. Oh, they're going to pay attention, especially nowadays. They're giving them $2, $3, $4 million. So they're going to get every chance possible. They're always there. They're on the radar. But that kid that just comes in, he's a 15th round pick, and they gave him a little bit of money to get to camp. It's different for them. And you found yourself in that position, like, okay, I'm not a big pick this year. I'm kind of a guy trying to make it after getting released by the Steelers, and kind of the rest is history. You're playing for a legendary guy in Bill Walsh. Soon he turns those reins over to Seifert, who is, I think, your defensive coordinator when you first got to the Niners. Do you go from cut to Montana and Young for the rest of your career are going to be throwing passes to you? The thing's amazing is I looked at your career. You were 3-0 in Super Bowls. Is that correct?
That is correct.
You only lost 33 games in your entire career. You won 110. These are the games that I counted that you started. You lost only 33 games. You won 110. So you go from this baseball player, catcher, take away your dreams, to one of the most winningest players in the history of football. It's unbelievable. All right, you get there. Montana, give it to me. What's it like going from now you're with a dynasty pretty much, and you got Joe Montana as your quarterback. What made him so much different?
Well, just the way that he handled the huddle, first and foremost, he was just supremely confident. Not a big yeller and screamer, more of a quiet confidence guy. Now he'd throw a jab at you, super funny, super sarcastic. And so you better not step out of line. But that was just to begin with. I think one of Joe's greatest abilities was to see the field and to see it, the whole spacing come to life. And looking back and thinking about it, Bill was really hard on Joe in his precise movements, his footwork, where to deliver the ball, when and where. But Joe was really like Magic Johnson, distributing the ball from point guard. And the routes would run and he would just see the defense, and he would be a high level processor. So the greatest processing chip you can imagine was implanted in Joe's brain, and it would process so quickly that he knew where to deliver the ball as soon as the routes were run maybe halfway. And so by the time you turn around, that ball was coming, and you better be ready because he's firing it right now. He was ridiculously accurate, had a much stronger arm than people realized, but his anticipation and his ability to process, I think, really set him apart more than anybody else that I'd ever seen.
You said Walsh was tough on. From what I hear, Walsh was tough on a lot of people. I remember seeing interviews later on in his life where he said, I wish I wouldn't have been as hard on people that I loved so much. But goes down as one of the greatest coaches ever. 89, or 88 and 89, you win back-to-back Super Bowls, and that's going to kind of play into what's going on right now with the Chiefs in this upcoming Super Bowl this Sunday. Which one was tougher, first one or the second one, especially being back-to-back? I mean, I look at it from the standpoint of, from a baseball perspective, I don't think much of it because like we play. If you got a good team, you go to the postseason. If you're great, you get a chance to go to the World Series. But I don't take into consideration the physicality of the football season.
Man.
And winning a Super Bowl means your season was 6 weeks longer than everybody else's. And now all of a sudden, back-to-back years where your season is 6 weeks longer than everybody else's. Talk to me about those two and being back-to-back. It's such a rare thing that happens in today's sports. You guys did it.
It is super rare. And Brett, I have to say, the first one seemed so much harder. We were up and down. We had a few injuries. We weren't playing to our potential in 88. We were at a point where I believe we're 6-5 and on the outside looking in at the playoffs. And all of a sudden, we had a players only meeting, and Ronnie Lott basically went nuts and talked about being accountable to each other, working hard, the talent. We're wasting so much talent on this team. And it was overnight. We snapped out of it and went on a heck of a roll into the playoffs. We weren't the favorite at the time, but we plowed through people and got to that Super Bowl. And I thought we'd match up pretty well with the Bengals, but it took that 92-yard drive with 2.5 minutes left in the game to cement the victory. And it was just reminiscent of our season. We just had to fight, scratch, and battle all the way through. And that one was so great. Amazingly, coming back in 89, we weren't afraid of talking about repeat. We said we want it, we owned it, we expected it, and I don't think anybody really gave us a game the whole year. We were 14-2 in the season, smashed everybody in the playoffs, beat the Broncos in the Super Bowl 55-10, and I believe that's one of the greatest teams ever. And you can put us up against, the 78 Steelers, the 85 Bears, you name it. That team I felt was almost invincible. And so I thought the repeat was going to be the hardest, but really coming back for the three-peat was going to be the most tough. And that's why I have a lot of respect for the Chiefs. When I look at their players and go through their roster, obviously Mahomes and Kelsey on the offensive side of the ball stand out, Chris Jones on the defense, but they don't have 8 or 9 guys going to the Pro Bowl. They don't have multiple all pros all over the roster. And so while they're maybe not the most talented team on paper, as a team and as a coaching staff, they put themselves in position to win all the time. And so you got to respect it. You can't, throw an asterisk up there and say, well, yeah, the Chiefs won, but if they go 3 Super Bowls in a row, you got to give them all the credit in the world. It's so ridiculously hard. In all honesty, I don't know how they're doing it. I didn't think that they were the best team last year. They won it. And I thought, well, there's no way they're coming back this year and running that gauntlet. And they've been able to do it, squeaking by in a lot of games, but it doesn't matter. If you do it, you do it. And man, we came so close. We had the Giants down and had Joe Montana in the fourth quarter got drilled by one of the Giants linemen and broke his arm, messed up his collarbone. He was out of the game. He had no chance. And Steve Young came in like a deer in the headlights. You have no idea. I mean, you can imagine he hadn't played, and all of a sudden it's the fourth quarter and it's 2nd and 20 and you're ahead by 2 points. And so we ran a play. It went nowhere. It was 3rd and 20, and he called this route 23 Texas. And if somehow the Giants are in too deep coverage, I'm running a seam route. And if he sees it's too deep, we got a shot. And so I'm up at the line of scrimmage screaming because I know that he's worried about calling the play, and he's going to throw a little delay route over the ball to Tom Rathman for 8 yards. And I'm screaming at him that it's too deep so he will acknowledge it. And Lawrence Taylor's pointing at me, yelling, "Watch Jones." And I mean, it's bedlam out there. He goes back to pass, throws the ball, puts it right on the money. We gain 30 yards down the middle into Giants territory. And I was pretty low key. I walked by Lawrence Taylor, dropped the ball, and said, "LT, I'm going back to the Super Bowl." And the next play, we put the ball on the ground. We had a couple of fullbacks that could have run the ball and would have never dropped it. But Roger Craig, and it's not just one guy, we had a couple of our linemen gave up some interior penetration, and they hit Roger when he was getting the handoff, and the ball's on the ground. And I'm thinking, holy crap, there's no way this is happening. And then Giants get the ball, drive 30, 40 yards and kick a field goal with no time left. And they're win our three-peat. And so I can vividly remember it, thinking we've got this iced and we're going back, and nobody's going to ever do what we did. And the chance just slipped away.
Sorry about that.
Oh, no worries.
Did Lawrence have anything to say to you after
No, I probably hid from him after the game. Yeah. At the time, he just, his shoulders were dropped. I mean, he knew, like, unless something miraculous happened, we had their number again. And so, man, that's just, it's hard one to think about. We all have those, I wish I had this play back or this game back. That's certainly it for me. To be so close, because we had a team that was capable of beating anybody and everybody at that time. Who knows what would have happened in the Super Bowl? We weren't going to have Joe Montana, and obviously Steve came in and from that point built a Hall of Fame career. It was pretty remarkable. And so, but yeah, it's you gotta give respect to this Chiefs team and Patrick Mahomes and certainly Andy Reid. They don't beat themselves. They don't. In spite of the fact that refs don't call holding on any of their offensive linemen, they still have managed to not beat themselves and put themselves in position to win the game all the time.
Well, and because of the success you had in San Francisco, it's when you start having that much success, people love to hate you, especially the
Oh,
fans. They're coming for you. You look at I look at the Yankees. Everybody always hated him. I hated him as a player playing against him. I was so frustrated. In the late '90s, they kept winning World Series. That being said, I had nothing but respect for what they were accomplishing and what they were doing. Now, being away from the game for quite a bit now for me in all of sports, I cheer for greatness. I have a little bit. I don't have a dog in the hunt for this weekend, other than I grew up in Philly and I got a ton of friends and family that just fly Eagles fly. They're those type of people. So yeah, a part of me is pulling for the Eagles, but a part of me also is pulling to see greatness, things that have
yeah.
never happened before. Everybody always wanted to get on Tom Brady, the haters, they call them. But I'm sitting there going, I want to see stuff in sports that's never been done before. So quietly, when everybody's pulling against the Chiefs, I'm like, if they can pull this off, you're going to have the refs come in. If they have that last minute drive, kick a field goal and win by 2, you're going to hear it all again.
Yes, yeah, for sure.
But, almost as an athlete, and you know what this feels like, those years you went through, you almost feel invincible. And everybody hates you so much, and everybody's gunning for you so much. Like you said, you saw Lawrence Taylor's shoulders drop, like they got us again. That's an unbelievable feeling as a player when you're on a special team like that. I remember
Yes.
early 2000s, my Mariners teams, we'd take the field, and that other team knew right then. I could tell by the way they were walking and talking. If it's the 7th inning, it was 4-2. They knew we were going to come back and get them. It's an empowering thing. It comes with a hell of a lot of success, and like you said, a special group of guys. But
Yeah.
it had to be unbelievable winning back to back, and then on the brink of going for a third time, and just almost at that point. And it's not from an arrogance thing, not from an arrogant space. It's just from no, we've been here before. I know these guys around me, and we're going again. And you were almost probably shocked when you didn't go back for the third time.
Absolutely. And it's that feeling that you're invincible, and you don't always have it, and come back, the next year it's a new set of guys. There's, a majority of them are there, but things are different. We had a ton of injuries in 91. And at the end of the season, we were playing great. We were 10-6. We were healthy. The Bears were going to the playoffs. We're the favorite team. We beat them on the last Monday night of the season, 55-7 or something like that. And we didn't get in. And so it was the only time in my career that I wasn't in the playoffs. And it was almost as devastating to be so close and not get in. And then in the next few years, we lost to the Cowboys in the NFC Championship. We were favored one of those years. And, you just never know if you're going to get back. And so, man, you just hang on to those special teams as tight as you can and never want things to change. But, once you lose, once somebody's injured, once it's a new season, the dynamics flip over and everything's always just a little bit different.
Yeah, which is good when you're on a shitty team.
That is for sure.
Let's flip the script. Okay, the three-peat coming up, opportunity for the Chiefs. What do you see? I don't know how well you know Andy Reid. I know you know Bill Walsh pretty. Bill Walsh seemed to me to be the serious guy. You got Andy Reid doing silly commercials. So their personalities seem pretty different. What do you see? Compare, I guess, Andy Reid, Bill Walsh. What's going on leading up to this Super Bowl and their styles?
What I think when I think about both of them, obviously two of the most elite all-time coaches that we've ever seen. Bill was great at figuring out how to motivate individuals. It was tough to motivate a team with one direct approach. You couldn't scream and yell and make that motivate everybody. There were some guys that would respond to that. Some guys would need a pat on the butt. Some guys would need encouragement and hype. Some guys would need tough love. Bill was fantastic at figuring out what motivated each guy. Ironically, the toughest guy, and not that he had to motivate him, but the toughest guy was Joe, because you couldn't motivate him with bringing in a guy behind him that was going to put pressure on him until they made that Steve Young trade. And they made the Steve Young trade, and Joe had the best season of his career. And so it was Bill, I think, was always trying behind the scenes to figure out how to motivate guys. Andy is a great coach and understands this generation is motivated completely different than the old school guys. You know, now it's humor and jokes and probably some encouragement, maybe a little tough love. But Andy, from the times that I've been around him at the Pro Bowl, was just a good guy that sucked it all in, that just absorbed information, was tremendously bright. Former offensive lineman, which I think I laugh thinking about it, but Mike Holmgren came from Bill Walsh's system with the West Coast offense, and Andy studied under Mike and then got his own shot. And so it's funny watching the Chiefs. You know, there's a lot of dynamics of their offense that I know are similar to the original West Coast offense, but he's put in place different variations. And obviously, with Patrick Mahomes being his Joe Montana, they're able to do so many different things. And so I think really the key is to figure out how to get guys to play together, how to motivate them to be their best. And both Bill and Andy have done that, just in a completely different environment, and they were able to do it. You know, you had mentioned that, Brett, that Bill Walsh had talked about being hard on his players. We talked a lot at the end of his life, and obviously it was tough. But had a chance to meet with him when he was the athletic director at Stanford, and we'd go and we'd talk, and he seemed like cuddly Coach Walsh. And I remember thinking, gosh, he was never like this when he was coaching. And he opened up and he told me more than a few times. He said, you know, I loved you guys. I loved you and felt so close to you, but I could never let you guys know that because it would affect my decision making. And he was very famous for letting a guy go a year before it was too late. And so he'd rather cut someone a year too early than a year too late. And whether you agree with it or not, I think a lot of guys held that against him for some years. But, you know, Bill, outside of the coaching ranks, felt like just a great, wise old grandpa that had all kinds of nuggets to share and talk about. And it'd be great to go sit around and talk with him. And I think Andy probably can be more cuddly at times. I'm sure not all the time, but you know, he can open up, show a sense of humor, put his arm around you, laugh. Whereas Bill, back in the days, that was very few and far between.
Yeah, it's an interesting dynamic because, I mean, it's no different in baseball. Obviously, today we look at 2025. It is different. You can't.
It is different.
Guys aren't treating the current day athlete like they were treating us when we were coming up. They're not grabbing you by the face mask anymore. I got a chance to, and I love when you talk about the different personalities and the different ways to not necessarily skin a cat, but there are different ways. You talk about Reed being this cuddly guy. I played for a guy like that. I played for Bruce Bochy, and to this day, he's a cuddly guy.
Yes.
He's the one guy I played for that I've never heard. And I got to play for some great managers. I played for Davey Johnson, then I played for Bobby Cox. I played for Lou Piniella, who's my all-time favorite, and I played for Bruce Bochy. Boch was the exception. He's the only guy that you mentioned Walsh not wanting to get too close or let you know what his feelings were for you because it would affect his job. Bochy's the only guy. He's the unicorn because I always saw great managers keeping their distance from the players because one day they're going to have to release you. They're going to have to trade you. They're going to have to send you down. So they keep a little buffer zone. That's for the coaches to be your buddies. And then the skipper's always got a little distance. Bochy's the only one I ever played for that really didn't keep a distance, and yet it works. Like I said, he's the unicorn. I had that the Lou Piniella, what you're talking about, the tough love. Boy, he was nothing but tough love for everybody. And if he sometimes didn't have the ability to know the personality and like, hey, you can't be that way to this guy, you're going to ruin him. And he didn't care. He's like, he's either getting on board or getting out of here. I don't want guys like him. So I
Brett, that
played
is
for all.
classic because obviously I grew up in knowing of all those managers and watching their personalities unfold, and of course not being on the bench with them. But man, I would figure that Lou would have been the closest to Bill probably, and Bill was very thoughtful. You know, he was a percentages guy and a numbers guy and a spread the offense and matchup guy. But man, when he got fired up, you did not want to be anywhere near him. And you just hope that you wouldn't take any shrapnel. And I'd imagine Lou was just like that.
Oh, Lou, I'll tell you what, if Lou has the right team out there, the right roster that fits his narrative, there's nobody like him. He is the greatest, the most fun, the most entertaining, and he'll take you to where you need to go. If you've got a roster of young players and guys that aren't quite sure of themselves, man, it's going to be a long year. I mean, I remember having to go into his office and say, Skip, you got to take it easy on so and so. What do you mean, Booney? I said, you got to take it easy on him. I don't care what you think. He's in the lineup every day, and if he does good, we do good. Well, I don't like how he does. I said, doesn't matter. This is our guy. And I remember going round and round with it, but he just wasn't built that way. It was he was that old school rough and tumble. This is what a man is, and this is what you do. I love him for it. He's my favorite Brent of all time. I mean, I could sit here and I could sit in a room with Lou all day and all night and just talk and just feed him topics and let him go. I mean, it's unbelievable. I had that relationship, but there are a lot of different ways to do it. The great ones find a way. You know, I see Andy Reid. He relates to the modern day player. Yet he could, he's got that knowledge for being around so long. So it's kind of like a double whammy for him. And I don't know. I just had Rob Ryan on the program yesterday, and he was talking about it all starts with Andy Reid and the prep and this and that, and how they have that uncanny ability to win the close one. It's probably like some of your Niners team. If you're down late in the fourth quarter and you've got to have one drive, you probably get in the huddle and go, we've done this a lot of times. We're going to do it again. I think the Kansas City this week, they have that feeling like if it's close and it's late, everybody on that field knows what usually happens. And that's a pretty good bullet to have in the chamber.
Yeah, it's a great bullet to have, and including the opposing defense knows it's coming at them too.
Yeah. It's almost like, it's all the Lawrence Taylor shoulder shrug, like, oh, here we go again.
Yep.
When you went from Walsh to Seifert, I know he was a part of that coaching staff. What was that like, that transition?
So you know what? It was interesting. I got to give George a lot of credit. He didn't make a lot of wholesale changes, and we kept the offense intact. Our coordinators, George loved defense, and George learned and was learning on the job to be a communicator and a guy that could run the whole team. I think that he kind of grew into that role and he established himself. I think, though, we didn't have wholesale changes. We didn't bring in a new offensive coordinator or a whole new system. We knew what was successful. And George was like Bill, maybe a little bit more quiet, and he would not necessarily wear his emotions on his sleeve, which was interesting because sometimes you didn't know what he was thinking. And so he was certainly building up into a better communicator, because typically he'd just yell and scream at the defense. That's what I knew of him. And, he'd pat him on the back when they needed to be, but he would be a yeller and a screamer and what the heck. And as a head coach, he pulled back from that and tried to include everybody and say, hey, these are the things that we need to do. We need to do this. He was very precise. And I think we had great structure. And so I've always felt like we were very prepared. We were never prepared for a big matchup. And it's tough because we lost a couple of NFC championship games along the way, under his tutelage. And, I still feel like, players got to make the plays. It's tough to blame the coach. And so we just, for whatever reason in those games, we didn't make the plays that we needed to. And, there's always tons of fingers pointing at, hey, the play calling this, or how come we didn't do that? But in the end, the players had to make plays. So George grew into the role and got more comfortable by his second or third year. And he was enjoyable. He would have a very under the radar, sarcastic type of sense of humor, personality. And so, like I said, you never really knew what he was thinking. At least the offensive guys didn't. And, but he kept everybody, one of the good things is you always wanted to be on edge a little bit. I don't think either Bill nor George ever let you get comfortable. And so there was an edginess to our team, to our practices, the way that we played, and how things were. And so that probably kept us ready and prepared. Now, our cuddly coach came in my very last year, Steve Mariucci, just a great young guy. He can't help himself. He's just a great guy, tons of personality, tons of fun. And he tried to be tough, but it took him a few years because he was coaching guys that were almost the same age as him.
Yeah, isn't it amazing how it usually doesn't work when you try to be something that you're not? And you said he was cuddly, but now I'm going to be tough because I'm, head guy, and
Yeah.
You kind of see right through it. Like, you're too good of a guy. Quit acting like that.
Exactly. Yeah,
I'm sure you
he'd
never
laugh if he yelled.
I'm sure you've never heard this one, but difference in Joe and Steve, two completely different quarterbacks. One a drop back, all of a sudden you got a guy scrambling all over the place. Both Hall of Famers. You won a Super Bowl with Steve as well. Those differences, and is there any adjustment for you as a tight end going from a Montana to a Young, figuring each other out in tendencies?
There's always that adjustment period. I was feeling like I was on a higher level with Joe initially, just because I know I have a feel for what he was thinking and what he was seeing and where I would move to an open zone, or we had a certain man coverage and a route was called, I knew I was going to get the ball. To Steve's credit, when he was traded over from Tampa, he was not a Hall of Fame quarterback. He could have been a Hall of Fame athlete. He had some great athleticism, but he learned the quarterback position behind Joe with Bill Walsh, and then Mike Shanahan came in, and of course Mike Holmgren as well, who had Steve at BYU. And then Mike Shanahan came in and really brought him to a new level. But Steve really developed throwing the ball and being precise with his reads and his footwork. And then, of course, every time he'd break the pocket, anything could happen because of his running abilities. And so I just, thinking back, I got to join Joe mid-career, and he was already a rock star.
Polished, yeah.
Exactly. And I got to be there for a good part of it. But then here comes Steve, and you never think, hey, you don't have a Hall of Fame career following a Hall of Fame career. So I thought, okay, well, here we go. Steve Young, how is he going to be? But he adjusted really quickly. And, the only thing for me that felt different was Steve would scramble. And then how do you react to that? Because sometimes we'd make big plays as he scrambled, in the passing game. And then sometimes he'd keep the ball and run and, put his head down and try to run over guys, which we always tell him to quit doing. But that's just kind of who he was. And so sometimes you'd have to adjust to where he was. I'd finish my route and all of a sudden he's not back in the pocket. But just a remarkable reader of defense. Both of those guys saw the field so well. But Steve had that extra gear with his speed where he could make plays with his legs. Joe was great at sensing the rush, avoiding it, sidestepping, moving here and there. Steve would break the pocket and run. But both of their understanding of the offense was just amazing. They were coaches literally in the huddle. They knew everything about everything. And it was, I mean, what a blast to play with both of those guys.
Here's a layman baseball question, but it's really interesting for me. I've never gone out for a pass in the NFL. Is it a big deal when all of a sudden, and I don't know through your career if anyone ever threw to you that was left-handed, but all of a sudden you got a lefty. Is that it? Because I know as a hitter, I'll tell you what, there's days I need a lefty because I'm not seeing the spin on that breaking ball going away from me, and I'm begging for a lefty. I know it's apples and oranges getting thrown to by a lefty as a receiver, but is there an adjustment there?
There is. I think it's a minor adjustment, but, you grow up and you almost exclusively play with right-handed quarterbacks. And I'd never seen any lefty throw the ball. And when Steve got traded to the 49ers, all of a sudden here's a left-hander and the ball would spin the opposite way. Right. And so just psychologically, it was different. And then sometimes, and for whatever reason, maybe it was as a release point, sometimes the ball would sail, at least early in his career. And so the different spin plus a little wind, and it was moving in a different direction than you would be used to. I know Jerry used to talk about it a lot. I would play catch with Steve a ton, and so I understood it, but I caught so many footballs from him that I started to get used to it. But yeah, there's a little tail, maybe a little bit of a flyer every now and then that would just kind of catch you off guard. And I don't know if it was his release point or just the opposite way of the spin, but it did take a little getting used to. But once you were used to it, you didn't think about it.
The game today, sports in general today, much different now than it was when I retired. Much different football game than when you retired. What are the biggest differences you see, other than today they have National Tight End Day? Other than that, what are the differences? The obvious differences do you see?
Brett, the rules have changed. Baseball outside of the clock on the pitcher has been pretty consistent over my lifetime. Football used to be pretty ruthless in terms of the rules, going over the middle, holding, pass interference. Tight ends were almost a second-class citizen when I played. And when you go over the middle, you took your life in your hands. Now everybody's protected. Nobody can hit you. I mean, it was a big difference. And some guys couldn't handle going over the middle and dealing with, knockout blows. Just think of how many hits and things we used to celebrate. We used to have the top 10 best hits, of the week or of the month. And now those things aren't even in existence. And so that's probably the biggest thing, I think. And player safety, I get it. Player safety has become a hallmark now of the NFL. The other thing I laugh about is rights. The players have, in the NFL, the players now have rights. We had no rights. The coaches, Bill Walsh would have laughed like, what? You guys don't have any rights. You have this many padded practices. You can only have a few double days during training camp. You can't have pads in both of those practices. You can't put pads on, you can only do it so many times during the season. It's like, wait, what? Rights? You can go out there in your shorts and run around. So, and obviously the money and, the athletes, I would say our generation grew up watching every sport known to man. I knew every player. I knew every coach. I knew the teams. I knew all the baseball teams. I knew who was in what division. I knew this, that, the other thing. I think players today come up and maybe they've played Madden, but they're not as obsessed with the game as our generation was. And so, I mean, it's a little unfair to say, but the guys that I played with truly played for the love of the game because nobody was making the money. Even the best quarterbacks weren't making walk away. I can retire, hey, I've made 100 mil, and I don't need to worry about playing anymore. All those
Yeah,
guys that I played with, it was a different era. Am not upset at today's guys making as much as they can or having rights. It's just the way the game has changed makes me laugh, because the guys that, spilled their blood and guts paved the way for these guys to have a pretty easy go of it compared to what we all did.
It's funny you talk about going across. Every time I have a football player on the podcast, we talk about it, and the question is getting hit by a Randy Johnson fastball, which to a baseball player really isn't a big deal. It's like nothing I ever thought about. Sometimes you get drilled, sometimes you don't. But you were just talking about when you played going across the middle. Now, that's something I couldn't imagine. Lining up, going across the middle, getting smoked right as I catch the ball. I couldn't imagine doing that. You talk about the rule changes in baseball. I've gotten to a point where I'm not so critical of, when I played, it was this way and it's better. I envy a lot of the things that the players today have at their fingertips, the
Yep,
technology, the data. Oh, what I would have
man.
done with that. I envy. I think a lot of things are great. They really, the level of treatment for the minor league players has gotten way better. Now you can make the argument, is that a good thing or a bad thing? Keeps you hungry when you're sleeping on a couch, making $650 a month.
Yeah, exactly.
In A-ball, that I wouldn't want it any other way. But the game is different. You talk to my dad, who caught for 19 years, and he sees that you can't run the catcher over, and he's like, "What kind of game are we playing
Yeah,
now?"
exactly.
But I think guys like you were kind of one of the first to kind of make that tight end position kind of a glamorous position. Now look where it's come. You went through Gronk. Now you got Kelsey. These are celebrated rock stars.
Yeah.
And I think you were the very beginning of that.
Well, it was nice to be a part of it. It certainly was the early stages. And man, I would have loved going across the middle with nobody around, nobody was allowed to hit me. It's funny, Brett. Everyone always says, "Well, what's it like going across the middle and getting hit?" Because you trust your quarterback 100%. So I don't know, when I'm running around, a lot of time I might not know where that offside safety is, or somebody that's leaking back into the throwing lane. And there were probably 8 or 9 times, maybe 10 times in my career, where the best way to describe it is you're running full speed, you turn your head around, and you're running into a brick wall, and all of a sudden you're on the ground and you don't know how you got there. And hopefully you don't. Hopefully you can get up and not have a concussion. A handful of times I did, and hopefully you held onto the ball. And that's the best description. If you want to replicate what it would be like, find a brick wall, run full speed, turn your head around, and run into it, and that's the sensation.
Oh man, you were a wide receiver in college. Okay, what were you? Were you a lineman that catches footballs, or were you a receiver that blocks?
I was a receiver that blocked, and I owned it. I spent a lot of time in the weight room, a lot of time on the blocking sled, trying to become a solid blocker. I was played at 230, 235. I felt I could hold my own, but the best, my most excitement was really matchups in the passing game, getting open, running routes, and that was really kind of how I made the team. That was my differentiator.
You watch the game today, once again, back to the Super Bowl coming up. How does Kelsey make Mahomes better? You've watched Kelsey, I'm sure, a lot, and it seems like he's always coming up with that third and long big play.
Man,
how good is he, and how does he help Mahomes do what he does?
He is great. And I know we used to always say, a quarterback's best friend is his tight end, because when you get in trouble, the receivers are all the way down the field. The further you have to throw that ball, the more, I'd say, athletic corners are. So they have that quickness, those fast twitch muscles. So when you're in trouble, hitting a wide receiver on a further pass down the field, Bill Walsh used to say the percentage of completion rate shrinks drastically, when you do that. So Kelsey in the middle of the field has great awareness. First of all, where there's pressure, where there's players, where he can fit into a hole, and where Mahomes can find him. And so there's a mental connection there that I believe that I had with both my quarterbacks, where and they know what you're thinking and what they're thinking, and just a feel. It's strange. It's more of a feel than anything that you can draw up, because you don't draw up the quarterback getting in trouble and scrambling one way versus the other, or pressure coming from the outside and he has to step up. Kelsey does a great job. Obviously, he's a big body, but he does a great job of using that body in man coverage, because he's not a 4 or 5 guy that's running by guys. And in zone coverage, he absolutely knows where to sit and find the hole. And people think, oh, well, that doesn't sound that hard. It's tremendously tough to sit, get in the quarterback's viewing lane, and not having guys undercutting you, coming underneath or over the top of you. So he just has a sense on how to be open. It's not just get open, it's how to be open when Mahomes needs them. And like I said, those short to intermediate throws under pressure are the ones that are completed the most, because you're going against a linebacker or safety that doesn't have that same athleticism as a corner that can drive on a ball that's in the air too long.
Watching this, I got a couple more and I'll let you go. I know this is going long, but this is fascinating for me. I love talking stuff that I'm sick of talking about baseball. I love talking about stuff that I'm layman at. I watch his Eagle team. I watched them last week, and I watched the Chiefs. Found a way, like you said. Everybody's always, the Chiefs aren't that good this year. They can't get. Here they are sitting in the Super Bowl again. This Eagle team, especially down the stretch, with all the weapons they have, Barkley being at the forefront. I just watched him put up 56 in the championship game. Man, I know you've played a lot of games. That doesn't happen. You had that Super Bowl where you scored 55, but those are rare occurrences. Everything to me says, wow, this Eagle team's better than the Chiefs. But then again, if it's close and it's late, advantage Chiefs. So who do you know? Chiefs are in Vegas. They're the favorite, like they always are. In your career, who had the most success against you? What was their strategy? So my question is, maybe it's comparable, maybe it's not. How did the Eagles stop Kelsey?
Well, it's a great question. I think the Eagles, first and foremost, that's really where it starts, right? Because if you want to stop Mahomes, you want to take away Kelsey. And so obviously he's getting older and not as quick, but I think grabbing him at the line of scrimmage and disrupting him, or being more physical with him, even though he's a physical player, throws off their timing. And so I think there's teams that have been physical with him, and it messes up his timing with Patrick, and Patrick looks away, or Kelsey all of a sudden appears covered or isn't at the top of his route yet. And so for me, there was a time a couple years ago where you could get gashed by being too physical with him. But he's probably lost half a step now. And so I think that's probably the best approach. And then outside, the Eagles have the most potential of putting pressure on Patrick Mahomes. Jalen Carter is just a beast. But it's one thing to put pressure on Mahomes, and it's another thing to actually sack him, because he somehow figures a way out, gets rid of the ball, steps up, sidesteps, scrambles, whatever he does. And so they've got to make sure, and I hate saying use a spy, but there's someone that has to be accountable for Mahomes breaking the pocket on almost every play, because him getting 15 yards downfield on 3rd and 8 is just a backbreaker. So I actually think people have done very poorly betting against the Chiefs, because they end up winning and they just keep winning. But I kind of like the Eagles in this game. I think Saquon Barkley ends up being the difference. It's not rocket science to pick him, but I think the Eagles' offensive line is just just a bunch of behemoths and open up some great holes. The Chiefs defense, I think, is good, but not great against the run. And I think if the Eagles have a chance to not get behind and they can just pound Barkley at them, they're going to have some success. And then, A.J. Brown and Devontae Smith are legitimate wide receivers. I love the fact that the Chiefs win without any big names. Their Juju Smith-Schuster and Xavier Worthy are good, but they're not A.J. Brown or Devontae Smith. And so the Eagles have the players, and they just have to kind of keep, as much as they can, keep Patrick Mahomes in a box. And I feel like they're finally at a point where we're going to see the Chiefs maybe handled this time around. But if Patrick Mahomes leads them down the field with a minute left and wins, I'm never going to be surprised. We've seen it so often. But should be a pretty darn good matchup, and I'm looking forward to it.
This is coming out. We're 3 days away from the Super Bowl. You've won 3 of them. What are the players going through right now? 3 days out.
You know what? It's not real yet for the guys the first time yet. You're there, you're enjoying the media sessions, you're having practice, but there's this big party atmosphere going on around you. And so maybe your family's coming in, you're going to see your family. Right around Friday, it gets real, Brett. And you're like, wow, I'm going to play in front of how many hundreds of millions of people watching the biggest game that you'll ever play in. And the pressure starts coming maybe Friday afternoon. And Saturday, you're starting to get ramped up. The butterflies are in the stomach. And then Sunday is, because the kickoff is a 6:30 East Coast start, is the longest day of your life. No matter what, you wake up, you're fired up, you have all this adrenaline, and you have to wait to the end of the day. So Sunday, you really have to take measured steps to, when do you eat, when do you relax? Maybe you can take a little nap before you head to the game. And then once you get to the game, it's business as usual, other than all the prelims and the America the Beautiful and the intros, and all the prelims are unlike anything that you've experienced in any other game in your career. So it's a little unnerving getting to kickoff. It takes about 25 minutes, I think, instead of the typical 10 minutes. And so players are, they're creatures of habit. They do what they do, and you're off your game a little bit by the time kickoff starts. And so hopefully you adjust when the ball's kicked. And then once you get out there, it's just another game that you need to win.
Yeah, I look at it twofold, though. It's like, well, we are creatures of habit. I was very much that way. I was regimented. I ate at this time. I went to the cage at this time. Okay, exactly. First pitch is at 7:05. I hit the top step at 7:04. So I was very regimented. You get to the playoffs, it's a little bit different. Those commercials are a little bit longer. For you, the halftime's got to be a huge adjustment.
Oh, it's a grind.
You probably have your halftime routine all year. It's, man, I go in and I do X, Y, Z. I'm ready to go. All of a sudden, you're sitting there for probably a half hour longer than you're used to. That being said, everybody on both sides of the football, both teams, they're all going through the same thing together.
It's true. It's true. It's just, can you deal with it? You know it's coming, but can you deal?
Who deals with it the best?
Yeah, exactly.
Last question. You close your eyes. Is there a particular Super Bowl memory that pops in if you just had one?
Man, I always thought I was going to catch a touchdown in every one of our Super Bowls, and it felt like everybody was open and we were just gashing people. I got a chance to get one in Super Bowl 24. And as a kid, catching a touchdown in the Super Bowl is the ultimate. And so for me, that was, I caught other passes in the other games, but I didn't get in the end zone. And so that one stands out the most. Just, of course, I got the ball up here in my office, and just to think, as a little kid watching those, and, what I thought was going to be hitting a home run in the World Series ended up being catching a touchdown in the Super Bowl. But it's pretty special. It's tough to beat that moment.
Well, Brent Jones, I appreciate this. This was, like I said, I hope I wasn't too big of a fanboy, but I love it. I love it. Love
It
it.
was a blast, Brett, and
Yeah, what a
like I said,
great career you had, and you were a big part of my young life and watching those great Niner teams. For those of you watching the Bret Boone podcast now, we have our own YouTube channel. Check it out. For those of you listening to the podcast on the Odyssey app or wherever you download your podcast. Till next time, keep it here.